What would you do if you had to choose between your family and true love, knowing that any decision could change your life forever?
Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. If the weight of your past threatened to destroy your future, would you have the courage to stand up and fight for it even if it meant trusting someone you never imagined? The deafening roar of the engines echoed through Grant Aerospace's main hangar as Oliver Grant walked briskly across the glass-polished floor, his eyes fixed on the prototype jet that promised to revolutionize the industry. He stopped in front of the aircraft and pointed to an engineer who was bringing him a technical report. Any inconsistencies in the propulsion system? We cannot make mistakes in the performance of a project that will carry my name. His voice was firm, almost cold, and no one dared question him. Oliver did not tolerate failure. Not when he was so close to fulfilling his mission, creating a plane that would redefine the limits of modern aviation. Behind the unshakable facade, there was a secret he held like an open wound. Years ago, on a commercial flight, he had lost his parents in a disaster that transformed his life. Since then, he pursued perfection in aviation, as if that could make up for their absence. Kilometers away, in the middle of a little-known airfield, Emily Davis, or Sky, as she was called on the circuit, was finishing adjusting the controls of the small jet she would fly that afternoon. With her weathered flight suit and determined expression, she was the definition of dexterity and improvisation. Sky was famous among clandestine pilots for her ability to maneuver with precision that bordered on impossible. Turning off the radio after confirming the route coordinates, she muttered to herself, "One last flight, Emily. Just one more and you'll be out of this." The money earned on the circuits was enough to support his younger brother and pay off the exorbitant debts his family accumulated when the Davis name fell out of favor following the financial scandal. Later that same day, Oliver and Sky's worlds collided. The annual event to demonstrate new aeronautical technologies brought together CEOs, investors, and renowned pilots from across the country. Oliver, as host, carefully observed each performance, with his typical judgmental stance. However, when Sky took off in a modified jet, murmurs began among the guests. Her performance was magnetic. The plane seemed to dance in the sky, performing daring maneuvers that defied the laws of gravity. Oliver stood still, his eyes glued to the horizon. "Who is this pilot?" he asked an assistant. Nobody had answers. When Sky landed and removed his helmet, the crowd went wild. Oliver watched her from afar, intrigued by the young woman with messy hair and a smile of pure confidence. But Emily knew that the less she said, the better it would be. She walked away before anyone asked too many questions. Oliver, however, was not someone who ignored talent. "She just redefines the impossible," he muttered to himself. Unbeknownst to Sky, that performance would mark the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. Oliver couldn't forget the mesmerizing precision of that flight. Even amidst the suffocating schedule and endless reports about the development of the new plane, the image of the unknown pilot seemed to linger in his mind like a distant echo. Deep down, there was something beyond technical fascination. The audacity of that performance had stirred something he didn't easily recognize, a mixture of admiration and defiance. He needed to know who she was, and more than that, he needed her on the team. The next morning, Oliver entered his office with the characteristic determination that made the staff immediately come to attention. He ran his finger through the contact list obtained from the previous event until he located the name Sky. "Is that all? A code name?" He frowned. The lack of information made it even more enigmatic, but also more irritating to someone used to having everything under control. After some calls and insistence that only a CEO with influence could sustain, Oliver finally got Sky's contact number. He entered the number precisely, almost without hesitation, but as he waited for the ringing sound, a subtle feeling of nervousness ran through him. On the other side, Emily was in a modest cafe with an old laptop in front of her. She reviewed overdue bills and installments with a familiar sense of heaviness. Her younger brother, Jack, was at school, and it was for him that she faced every day of uncertainty and instability. When the phone rang, she frowned when she saw an unfamiliar number, but answered it cautiously. "Is it Sky?" The voice was firm but had an authority that Emily immediately recognized. "I'm Oliver Grant, CEO of Grant Aerospace. I watched your presentation at yesterday's event." Emily froze for a moment. It was not uncommon for pilots to be approached by companies, but this was Oliver Grant, someone whose achievements in the industry were legendary. "Sorry, I'm not available for work," she started to say, but was interrupted. "I'm not offering an ordinary job," he said with deliberate calm. "I am developing an airplane that will change the standards of global aviation. I need someone with your skill and vision to help me make it perfect." Emily hesitated. The offer seemed tempting, but she knew CEOs like Oliver, demanding, controlling, and generally lacking patience for complicated stories like hers. "I appreciate it, but I'm not interested." Oliver was momentarily surprised. He was not used to receiving refusals, and this only reinforced his curiosity. "Sky, or whatever her real name is," he said, his voice taking on a deeper tone. "I know talent when I see it. I'm not asking you to accept it now, but at least come and talk to me. If after that you still want to refuse, I will accept your decision." Emily took a deep breath. The tone of defiance in his voice stirred something inside her. She knew she needed the money, but she hated the idea of submitting to the world she had fled. However, something compelled her to accept the invitation to the meeting, even if it was just to listen. The next afternoon, Emily entered the imposing Grant Aerospace building, feeling out of place amidst the luxury and sophistication. Oliver was waiting for her in a meeting room with large windows that offered a spectacular view of the city. He greeted her with a nod and began to explain the project with a passion she hadn't expected. As Oliver spoke, gesturing to schematics and holographic projections of the plane, Emily realized that behind that rigid facade was a true obsession with perfection. "He wasn't simply building a plane, I was trying to achieve something that transcended the corporate world. You have the experience my team lacks," he concluded, looking her straight in the face. "But that's not all. You have courage and intuition. And I need that as much as any technical calculation." Emily was silent for a few moments, fighting the urge to refuse again. But the mention of payment, coupled with the urgency to resolve her debts and protect Jack, changed her mind. "He is well. I accept," she said finally. "But on one condition, I work my way." Oliver raised an eyebrow, surprised by the boldness, but gave a slight smile. "I expected nothing less from you." The following days were marked by increasing tensions. Emily quickly rose to prominence on the team, but her unconventional approach irritated Oliver, who preferred precision and proven methods. On the other hand, Emily thought Oliver was stubborn and insensitive, unable to see beyond the norms he created for himself. During a heated discussion about testing the prototype, Emily exploded. "You want a plane that challenges limits, but you're afraid to risk anything," she said, looking at him. Oliver was visibly angry, but he also realized there was an uncomfortable truth to her words. Behind each conflict, however, something began to grow. Both recognized in the other an uncontrollable passion for what they did, and this united them in a way that neither of them could yet admit. The days following Emily's start at Grant Aerospace were intense, a true collision between two forces of nature. In the engineering lab and main hangar, where Oliver's ideas took shape in gleaming metal and cutting-edge technology, Emily's presence seemed to function as a chaotic, unpredictable element. Oliver was an absolute perfectionist, a calculating strategist who tolerated no deviations from his vision. His firm posture, straight shoulders, and always focused expression conveyed effortless authority. Emily, on the other hand, operated with a different kind of precision based on instinct and practical experience. This approach made her brilliant but unpredictable, something Oliver struggled to accept. That day, the discussion began in front of the airplane prototype. Oliver pointed to performance graphs displayed on a holographic screen. "We need to recalibrate the stability control system. If we do not maintain the parameters strictly within what was designed, the risk increases exponentially." Emily crossed her arms, leaning slightly to the side. "With all due respect, you are thinking like an engineer, but not like a pilot. The numbers don't tell the whole story. I've seen aircraft crash because they relied too much on perfect graphics and forgot how humans actually fly." Her tone was firm but not aggressive. Still, Oliver felt his blood boil. He turned to face her directly, jaw clenched. "And do you think your intuition trumps years of research and simulations?" Emily held her gaze. "It's not about overcoming. It's about understanding that no system is perfect. A pilot needs flexibility, and that's what I'm trying to explain." The surrounding engineers exchanged tense glances, knowing that this verbal duel was far from over. However, what no one noticed was the mix of emotions that each of them tried to hide. Oliver felt a growing irritation, but deep down, he also knew that Emily was right on some points. This frustrated him more than anything. Emily, on the other hand, was used to being underestimated and challenged, but there was something about Oliver that put her off. He was not just obstinate, he genuinely believed in what he did. This conviction made her want to prove to him that his approach had value too, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was exposing herself too much by getting involved so intensely. At the end of the discussion, Oliver ended the conversation with a cutting tone. "Let's continue as planned. If something goes wrong, it will be my responsibility, not yours." Emily pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to respond. She knew that, at that moment, insisting would be useless. He turned and left the hangar, feeling the weight of eyes on his back. Later, as Oliver reviewed the reports in his office, an uncomfortable thought arose. He realized that Emily was more than just a technical challenge, she made him question the way he had always worked. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the idea. Feelings and work don't mix, he thought. Meanwhile, Emily was in the small apartment she was temporarily renting. Sitting at the table, she looked at an old document that she hid in a folder marked private. It was one of the few records left of the scandal that destroyed his family. His heart sank at the thought of what would happen if Oliver or anyone else discovered his past. I can't trust anyone, she muttered to herself. It doesn't matter how different he looks. In the following days, conflicts continued. Emily often challenged Oliver's decisions, while he insisted on following strict protocols. Despite this, something began to change. In a simulated flight test, Emily identified a flaw that no one else had noticed, saving weeks of work. After the test, Oliver called her into his office. He was waiting for her standing at the table, with his arms crossed. When Emily walked in, she was prepared for another argument, but was met with an unexpected comment. You were right about the control system. If not for your observation, we might have faced a serious problem. Emily blinked in surprise. I didn't know you admitted when you were wrong, he replied, with a slight smile. Oliver couldn't help but laugh, although his tone was still serious. I admit it when it makes sense. Don't get used to it. She left the room with a strange feeling, as if they had taken a small step towards something different. Although there was still tension, mutual respect was beginning to emerge, even if they both refused to admit it. The roar of the experimental jet's engine filled the hangar as the team gathered around Oliver and Emily. The tension was palpable. The test they were about to perform was the most advanced yet, and any mistake could mean not only a catastrophic failure, but also weeks of lost work. Oliver, standing in the center of the room, projected a controlled calm that masked his concern. He was analyzing the latest reports with a critical eye, while Emily, across the room, adjusted her pilot suit. Already? Oliver asked, not looking away from the holographic screen in front of him. Emily responded with a nod, feeling the weight of every gaze that fell on her. She knew that many on the team still considered her an outsider who worked outside the norm. But she also knew that this was the moment to prove that her presence there was more than deserved. The flight would be conducted in a closed circuit at low altitude to test the system's behavior under simulated emergency conditions. Oliver decided to watch the test from inside the plane, something he rarely did. For him, this was more than a project, it was a personal mission, a tribute to the memory of his parents. As they boarded the aircraft, the silence between the two was almost palpable. Emily, in the pilot's seat, adjusted the controls with meticulous precision, while Oliver watched her every move with a critical eye. The tension between them was familiar, but different now. There was a sense of mutual understanding that was beginning to form. When the plane reached its planned altitude, Emily's voice broke the silence. If you want to watch it up close, you have to trust me. She spoke with a serious tone, but there was a slight hint of defiance in her words. Oliver crossed his arms, keeping his tone professional but with a hint of unexpected sincerity. I wouldn't be here if I didn't trust. The test began as planned, with controlled maneuvers and adjustments to the navigation system. But in the middle of the operation, a sharp alarm echoed through the cabin. Emily looked at the indicators and felt her stomach tighten. The lateral propulsion system is failing, he said, his voice firm despite the gravity of the situation. Oliver leaned forward, evaluating the data. We need to stop the test and return now. Emily pursed her lips. We can't land without stabilizing the system, or we'll go off the runway and crash. I need to improvise. Improvise? Oliver repeated, his incredulous tone laced with concern. Emily ignored the protest and began manually adjusting the controls as the plane began to lose stability. The tension in the cabin was overwhelming, but she remained focused, moving with the confidence of someone who knew what they were doing. Oliver watched, torn between admiration and fear. He never trusted improvisation, but now he had no choice but to believe in Emily's ability. When she finally stabilized the aircraft, the silence that followed was almost deafening. When they landed safely, the ground team rushed to meet them. Oliver stepped off the plane, his normally impassive face now carrying a mixture of relief and something deeper respect. That night, as the two returned to the hotel where they were staying for their business trip, the tension had eased, giving way to a different kind of connection. You were amazing today, Oliver admitted as they walked down the empty hallway. I don't say this easily. Emily, surprised by his sincerity, responded with a shy smile. I just did what I had to do. But something about her hesitant tone caught Oliver's attention. He stopped, turning to face her. You always talk like it's not enough, even when it clearly is. Why? Emily looked away, feeling the weight of the question. For a moment, she thought about telling the truth, but fear held her back. Some things are hard to let go of, she said finally, keeping her answer vague. Oliver noticed the barrier, but didn't press. Instead, for the first time, he shared something of himself. I understand. My work also began as an attempt to come to terms with something I had lost. Emily looked at him, surprised. Oliver's tone was different, vulnerable. She didn't respond, but that moment created an invisible bridge between them, something they both felt but couldn't name. The days following the test flight were strangely calm, but the calm had an uncomfortable weight. Emily continued to work on the project with her usual determination, but every interaction with Oliver seemed to carry an unspoken tension. Since their conversation at the hotel, something had changed between them, something they both felt but neither dared to acknowledge. Oliver, on the other hand, was beginning to tap into an instinct he couldn't ignore. There was something about Emily that didn't quite fit. He was meticulous about who he brought onto his team, and now, as he revisited what little data he had on Sky, small inconsistencies began to emerge. His training and technical history were clear, but the rest? It was like a puzzle with missing pieces. That night, sitting in his office, Oliver opened his laptop screen and began to investigate. He scoured databases, event logs, and even internal reports that Sky had sent. The more I looked, the more questions emerged. Who was she before she became Sky? Why did he seem to have erased his past? He was not used to uncertainty, and it unsettled him. Meanwhile, Emily left the hangar late, the weight of her double life more present than ever. She knew her presence at Grant Aerospace was a risk, but she couldn't back down now. Jack needed her, and the money from the contract with Oliver was essential to keep his debts under control. But when her phone vibrated, anxiety hit her like a wave. The message was short, but it chilled his blood. "Did you think you could hide forever?" She stopped in the middle of the empty parking lot, looking around with her heart racing. The dim streetlights created unsettling shadows, and every noise seemed amplified. Whoever it was knew where she was. Emily gripped the phone tightly, taking a deep breath to calm herself. It wasn't the first time he'd received threats, but this one felt different, closer, more personal. When she got home, Emily carefully locked the door and sat down at the kitchen table, her phone still in her hand. She knew she couldn't ignore it, but she also had no one to turn to. Jack was sleeping in the next room, and the thought of putting him in danger paralyzed her. The next day at the office, Oliver called Emily into a meeting under the guise of reviewing the results of the test flight. She entered the room with her confident stance, but inside she felt a growing uneasiness. Oliver, sitting behind his desk, watched her carefully. "I want to discuss something," he began, crossing his arms and leaning slightly forward. But before he could say more, Emily interrupted. "If this is about the test flight, I've already adjusted the reports. It's not about that." Oliver cut her off, his tone calm but filled with something she couldn't decipher. "I've been reviewing some things. About you." Emily's heart seemed to stop for a moment. She forced a smile. "That sounds a little personal for a technical job, don't you think?" Oliver didn't back down. He was direct, but there was an unexpected softness to his voice. "Why do you avoid talking about your past? I know you're brilliant at what you do, but everyone has a story. And yours seems incomplete." Emily felt the pressure of her facade threatening to give way. She couldn't afford to lose control, not now. "Just because I prefer to focus on the present," she replied, keeping her tone casual. "I don't think my past is relevant to what we're doing here." Oliver held her gaze for a long moment, before finally pulling back. "Fine," he said, but something in his tone indicated he wasn't convinced. As Emily left the room, Oliver watched her silhouette disappear down the hallway. He knew something was being hidden, but at the same time, a part of him wanted to believe that she had her reasons. Later that night, Emily received another message: "If you don't look for me by tomorrow, I'm going to look for you." She knew exactly who she was, one of the people involved in the scandal that destroyed her family, someone who had a vested interest in making sure she never got back on her feet. Emily closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She needed to find a way out, but every step seemed to lead to a dead end. The silence that hung in the hangar seemed thicker than usual that morning. Emily worked at the prototype's console, adjusting the controls with the precision of someone trying to find refuge in something they could control. His mind, however, was far from there. The threatening messages he had received never left his head, each word echoing like a sentence. From the other side of the hangar, Oliver watched her. He recognized Emily's methodical pace, but there was something different about her. The normally steady hands seemed hesitant. The eyes that used to shine with conviction were now filled with something he couldn't identify: tiredness, perhaps, or fear. He finally decided he could no longer ignore the growing discomfort. "Emily, can you come to my office?" His voice sounded more like a command than an invitation. Emily looked up, feeling her stomach drop. "Of course," he replied, keeping his tone casual as he tried to hide the tension on his face. In the office, Oliver closed the door behind her, a gesture that immediately added weight to the room. He positioned himself behind his desk, but didn't sit down. His gaze was firm, his voice controlled, but full of intention. I'll get straight to the point, he said. I know you're hiding something. And I'm not just talking about little things. I'm talking about something you've been avoiding since the day you got here. Emily felt her heart speed up. She kept her expression neutral, but she knew he could sense her hesitation. I don't know what you're talking about. Oliver stepped forward, placing his hands on the table. Don't do this, Sky. I've been watching you since day one. You're good, incredibly good at what you do, but there's a side of you that you try desperately to hide. And I need to know what it is. His voice was firm, but there was no anger. There was something deeper, a need to understand. It disarmed her in a way she hadn't expected. She took a deep breath, fighting to maintain control. I'm just someone trying to do my job. That should be enough, right? Oliver shook his head slowly, as if trying to find patience. That would be enough, if it weren't for the fact that I'm betting everything on this project. And that means I need to trust you. But how can I trust you if I don't know who you really are? Emily felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, fear, vulnerability. She wanted to scream at him, tell him he had no right to question her like that. But I also knew that, in a way, he was right. I can't give you that answer, she said finally, her voice lower than she intended. Why not? Oliver asked, his frustration finally showing. What is so terrible that you would rather put everything on the line than tell me? Emily swallowed hard but didn't respond. She knew any word could open a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Oliver stepped back, his shoulders tense. Okay, he said, after a long silence. But know that, without trust, this project will not work. And neither do we. Those words hit her like a blow, but she stood her ground. When he left the office, he felt like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Later that night, Emily knew she could no longer delay the confrontation. She arranged to meet with the person behind the messages. They found themselves in a deserted parking lot, lit only by a few dim lights. When she saw the familiar figure emerge from the shadows, her fear turned to anger. What do you want? He asked, keeping his voice steady. The man smiled, a smile that carried both cruelty and satisfaction. Do you think you can escape what you did? Or what your family did? Emily felt her blood boil. I didn't do anything. But you will pay for it anyway, he replied. Unless? Emily crossed her arms. Unless what? He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Unless you give me what I want. She knew exactly what he wanted, information that could destroy the Grant Aerospace project and ruin Oliver. He was a former businessman, someone who had lost everything after the financial scandal that engulfed Emily's family, and was now willing to use any means to get revenge. I'm not going to help you, Emily said firmly. Then prepare to lose everything, he replied, before disappearing into the darkness. As Emily drove home, the weight of the situation crushed her. She knew she couldn't go on like this, but she also knew that revealing the truth to Oliver would mean opening a wound she wasn't sure she could heal. It was a cold, gray morning, as if the world reflected the storm that was brewing in Emily's life. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she stared at the phone in her hands as if it were a bomb about to explode. The threats had intensified, and she knew she could no longer avoid the truth. Jack slept in the next room, the restless sleep of a teenager who had lost his innocence too soon. Emily looked at him tenderly, but also with a weight in her chest. He was the reason for everything: the difficult choices, the sleepless nights, and the constant sacrifice. Later that day, she walked into Oliver's office. He was standing near the panoramic window, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't turn around when he heard the door open. I thought you weren't going to come around here again, he said, his voice low but full of tension. Emily closed the door behind her, each step toward his desk heavy as lead. We need to talk, Oliver. And I need you to listen to me until the end. Finally, he turned, his dark eyes boring into her with an intensity that made her hesitate for a moment. I'm listening. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. There was no softening the blow. My real name is Emily Davis, she began, her voice shaking slightly. My father was Douglas Davis, the man behind one of the country's biggest financial scandals. Oliver stood still, but she could see his surprise turn into a mixture of anger and suspicion. Keep going. Emily looked down, unable to look at him as she unearthed her past. My father ran an investment fund that collapsed, destroying thousands of people's savings. I was young, but I worked for him at the time. When everything fell apart, he used my name in several transactions to try to protect himself. She paused, feeling her throat tighten. I was investigated, accused, and condemned by public opinion before I even fully understood what had happened. I've spent years trying to rebuild my life, but the name Davis carries a weight that I've never been able to leave behind. Oliver crossed his arms, his expression hard as stone. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I knew you would react like that, Emily replied, her voice taking on a defensive tone. I knew you would think I was a threat, that you couldn't trust me. But all I did was fight to survive. He took a step towards the table, resting his hands on it and leaning slightly forward. You lied about who you are. Do you understand what this means for my company, for the project? Emily felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I know how it sounds, but I would never do anything to jeopardize this project or your company. That's all I have now. There was a long silence. Oliver walked away, turning to the window again, as if trying to find clarity in the chaos she had just thrown at him. You knew this was going to happen eventually, didn't you? He asked, without looking at her. I knew, Emily replied, her voice now just a whisper. But that doesn't make it any easier. Oliver turned again, his eyes meeting hers. They were filled with suppressed anger, but also something else, disappointment. You put everyone at risk. And now I have to decide if you still deserve my trust. The words hit him with a force she hadn't expected. Oliver was a man who valued control above all else, and now he was faced with a choice that defied his logic. Emily knew there was nothing more to say. She took a step towards the door, but stopped before leaving. I just want you to know, she said, without turning around. Everything I did here was honestly. You may never believe me, but this is the truth. She left, and the silence that remained behind seemed more deafening than any words spoken. Oliver's office was silent that night except for the sound of the clock marking the seconds. He was sitting in his leather chair, his head resting on his hands, his elbows stuck at the table. Emily's words still echoed in her mind, each heavier than the previous one. My father used my name to protect himself. Oliver closed his eyes. He understood the weight of responsibility more than most. He himself carried the expectations of an entire industry, but he had never imagined what his name was dragged by the mud so brutally. He got up, walking to the window, where the city's lights shone like small sparks of hope in the darkness. He needed to decide. And for Oliver, decisions were not just choices, they were unshakable commitments. The next morning Emily was in the hangar, adjusting a panel in the prototype. His face was tired, his eyes shaded by the sleepless nights. The conversation with Oliver had left marks she couldn't hide. His thoughts were so confused that he hardly realized his approach. Oliver stopped a few steps from her, the erect posture, but the look less hard than the day before. Emily, we need to talk. She turned slowly, her arms crossed in an almost defensive gesture. I have nothing more to say, Oliver. You already know who I am. But I don't know everything, he answered, his voice low, but firm. And that's exactly what worries me. Emily sighed, leaving the tools aside. Why are you here? To fire me? Oliver shook his head. No. I want to understand. The words surprised him as much as to her. Emily stared at him for a moment, trying to discern if there was sincerity in his tone. Finally, she let out a long breath and pointed to a nearby table. They sat down, and she started talking. She told about the night when she was confronted by the authorities, how her father disappeared, leaving her with a mountain of trouble. He told about the judgments, the eyes of contempt, the closed doors. About how to rebuild your life seemed impossible. I just wanted a chance, she said, her voice failing. Something that was not stolen by a name that I didn't even choose to carry. Oliver heard in silence, absorbing every word. He saw something he had not noticed before, the force that came from vulnerability, from the constant struggle not to be consumed by the circumstances. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment. Finally, he said, I believe in you. The words hit it hard. You believe it? Yes, he answered. And I know what it means to be defined by something you didn't choose. Emily saw the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a thread of hope. But we have a bigger problem, Oliver continued. The man who is threatening you. Emily nodded, fear mixing with determination. He wants to destroy you and the project. So let's stop him, Oliver said, the firm and unshakable voice. But for that, we need to work together. The two spent hours elaborating a plan to expose the man behind the threats. Emily provided details about her relationship with the enemy and the strategies he could use to harm them. Oliver, with his analytical view and resources, began setting up a scheme to protect the project and at the same time collect evidence against it. They became a team, a balance between emotional strength and rationality. Despite the tension he still hovered, there was a mutual respect that approached them in a way that neither could ignore. That night, while leaving the hangar together, Oliver looked at Emily and said something she never imagined saying. You are not alone in this. Emily, surprised, felt an unexpected heat in her chest. Thank you, Oliver. Behind their determination, there was something deeper growing, the understanding that their lives, so different, were now intertwined by something larger than the project or the secrets they carried. Grant Aerospace hangar was controlled chaos. Technicians and engineers ran from side to side, adjusting the latest details in the prototype that, within hours, would make its official inaugural flight. It was a historic moment for the company and for Oliver Grant, but the weight that hung over it went beyond professional responsibility. Oliver was standing next to the plane, observing the reflexes of light in his fuselage. His hands were crossed on his back, but his fingers squeezed each other tightly. This was the apex of years of work, but also the moment when he would face the largest of the fears he had been carrying since his childhood. His mind wandered for painful memories of the accident that had taken his parents, twisted metal flashes, and the deafening sound of destruction. Across the hangar, Emily watched Oliver. She could see the tension on his shoulders, the distant look. Despite the conflicts, she knew that this man was moved by something deeper than ambition. He was guided by a desire for redemption and overcoming that she understood well. Emily approached hesitantly but determined. "Oliver," she began, the soft but firm voice. "I know this is not just about the plane. It's about you." He looked away at her, surprised by the sudden honesty. "What do you mean?" "You are facing the same fear I faced when I first entered the first time," Emily continued. "The fear that the past will be repeated. But you are stronger than that." Oliver was silent, absorbing her words. He wanted to argue, but I knew Emily was right. She continued, "This plane is your chance to rewrite the story. To show the world, and yourself, that the past does not define who you are." For a moment, Oliver felt something unexpected: gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, and at that moment there was a genuine connection between the two that transcended words. Hours before the inaugural flight, Emily received another message from the man who threatened her: "If you don't go out now, everything you built will crumble." She knew this wasn't just a bluff. He had the means to sabotage the project, and Emily couldn't let it happen. She shared the message with Oliver, who immediately mobilized her security team. "Let's not let him win," Oliver said firmly. With the data provided by Emily, Oliver was able to track the man to a property around the city. He made a point of leading the team that would confront the enemy, taking Emily with him, despite his initial reluctance. When they arrived at the scene, Emily felt her stomach turn. The man, a former partner from his father, received them with a smile of derision. "Do you really think you can stop me?" Oliver stepped forward, the voice firm as steel. "What you did with Emily and so many other people ends here." The confrontation was tense, but with the evidence gathered by Oliver and Emily's collaboration, they managed to neutralize the threat. For Emily, that was more than a legal victory, it was a moment of liberation. She looked at the man who terrified her so much and felt a wave of relief from realizing that he had no power over her anymore. The next day, the hangar was crowded with reporters, investors, and team members. The climate was of anticipation and nervousness. When Oliver took the stage to speak, his voice was firm but loaded with emotion. "Today is not just about technology, innovation, or business," he said. "It is about believing that we can overcome our greatest fears and challenges. This plane is not just a milestone for aviation, it is a symbol of what we can achieve when we do not let the past define." Emily watched from the crowd, feeling the impact of his words as if they were directed at her. When the plane took off, the roar of its engines seemed to carry all the hopes, fears, and fights that brought Oliver and Emily until that moment. The aircraft rose with grace, cutting the sky as a promise of new beginnings. Oliver, watching the flight, felt something loose inside him, as if finally he could let the past rest. Emily, beside her, smiled. Both knew that this moment was more than professional, it was deeply personal. Time seemed to run slower on the clear morning that Emily Davis, known for so long only as Sky, was preparing for her first official speech as the new director of operations at Grant Aerospace. The stage was mounted on the same hangar that had witnessed so many twists in his life, and now, filled with an audience of engineers, investors, and young dreamers, that space carried special meaning. Emily adjusted her navy blazer in front of the mirror, inspiring deeply as she remembered each battle waged to get there. The invisible scar of her past was still there, but now she no longer carried the weight alone. Oliver Grant, with his presence calm and confident, was across the room, talking to a group of investors. From time to time he would look at Emily, and the slight smile they shared was enough to calm her down. When he took the stage, the room was silent. Emily looked at the audience, but her mind stopped on the 12-year-old boy she knew how to sit in the first row. Jack, his brother, had a radiant smile and eyes shining with pride. He looked at her like she was an epic tale heroine, and it made her smile. She started talking. Each word carried the strength of his journey, the overcoming of fears, and the hope he had found amid chaos. "For a long time, I thought my name was an anchor, something that kept me in the background, preventing me from going up. But today, I see that what really matters is not what is behind us, but what we decided to build from this. This project is proof that when we combine innovation, courage, and determination, we are able to conquer the impossible." Oliver, stopped by the stage, felt his chest tighten with pride. There was something in Emily that he never saw in anyone, a delicate but relentless force. He knew that without her, none of this would have been possible. Later, as the guests dispersed, Emily left the hangar in search of a moment of silence. The sky was dyed with orange by sunset, and the wind brought a comforting freshness. She heard footsteps behind her and, without having to turn around, knew it was Oliver. "Beautiful presentation," he said, approaching his hands in his pockets. "Thank you," answered Emily, looking at the horizon. "But I only got it because someone believed me when I didn't believe it myself." Oliver smiled sideways, stopping beside her. "I think I learned something from you. Not everything can be solved with logic. Sometimes we need intuition." Emily laughed, a soft sound that seemed to dissolve the tension of recent months. "And I learned that a little structure and strategy is no harm to anyone." They were silent for a moment, the kind of silence that does not require words because the understanding is already there. Oliver finally broke the moment. "So what is coming now?" Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting both determination and soft. "Now we continue. We build something bigger, something that inspires us every day." He nodded, realizing that continuing meant more than just work. It was a promise of partnership, mutual support, to face together what the future brought. When he reached out, she accepted without hesitation. And there, under the sky that seemed infinite, they decided to board the most challenging journey of all, share their worlds, their dreams, and their lives. Months later, the new Grant Aerospace plane model dominated the headlines, revolutionizing the market. Emily had become an iconic figure in aviation, inspiring a new generation of pilots and engineers, while Oliver, more human and affordable, led the company with a renewed vision. Although work still demanded much of their time, they learned to create small moments just for them. A coffee on the porch of Oliver's apartment, a casual flight over the weekend, or simply long conversations about what motivated them. In the last scene, Oliver and Emily are side by side in the cockpit of a small plane, flying under a clear sky. The camera moves away, showing the horizon ahead, infinite and full of possibilities. And so, with a promise of new challenges and the certainty that they had each other, the future seemed brilliant and full of opportunities. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family, who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.